Welcome to the Henry George Daily Devotional, episode 48. We start chapter 7, the correlation and coordination of these laws, in book 3, the laws of distribution. Cool. George writes, the conclusions we have reached. Well, how big is this chapter? Not big. We're going to do 2 chapters in one video. The conclusions we have reached as to the laws which govern the distribution of wealth recast a large and most important part of the science of political economy, as at present taught, overthrowing some of its most highly elaborated theories and shedding a new light on some of its most important problems. Yet in doing so, no disputable ground has been occupied. Not a single fundamental principle advanced that is not already recognized. The law of interest and the law of wages, which we have substituted for those now taught, are necessary deductions from the great law which alone makes any science of political economy possible, the all-compelling law that is as separable from the human mind as attraction is inseparable from matter, and that's gravity, and without which it would be impossible to provise, it's a cool word, or calculate any human action, the most trivial or the most important. This fundamental law that men seek to gratify their desires with the least exertion, you could also call this the law of incentives, I guess, as I'm terming it. In our modern era, we talk a lot about incentives and this and aligning someone's incentive. So somebody has we assume people have desires and they want to gratify them, and then they do so with the least exertion. So they are incentivized to follow this path to gratify their desires. That's how I would describe it in an incentivization paradigm. This fundamental law that men seek to gratify their desires with the least exertion becomes, when viewed in its relation to one of the factors of production, the law of rent, in relation to another, the law of interest, and in relation to a third, the law of wages. And in accepting the law of rent, and as George mentioned, interest is the return to capital, and capital is just stored up labor, and wages is the return to labor. So in some sense, interest should be, it's funny, right? Because there's the capitalists and the socialists, and they all consider the battles between capital and labor, and then they think land should be thought of as capital, and they're like, but the socialists think that the labor should be in control. I mean, this is broad stroke stuff. And then the capitalists think again, they kind of agree. It's all about labor and capital, and they think of land as capital, but they think that the capital should run things. I guess that's how some people characterize it. And then George comes along and says, y'all are dumbos. Capital is just stored up labor, and land is none of those. Land is its own thing. And yeah, I'm being a little unfair. I mean, capitalists and socialists do say there are 3 factors of production, often land, labor, and capital. But they they at least in the modern era they really minimize the land question. All right, George says. Um, and in accepting the law of rent, which since the time of Ricardo has been accepted by every economist of standing. When did is it Henry Ricardo? Ricardo's law of rent. David Ricardo. David Ricardo. He was born in 72. I know that Wealth of Nations was published in 76. That's funny. He influenced Malthus, Keynes, More, whoever More is. He was influenced by Smith. Oh, He's saying Malthus and Ricardo influence one another. Bentham, Mill, Rahman ibn Khaldun, I don't know. He's a Whig, member of Parliament from the UK. Ricardo. Ricky Davy Ricardo. Just make sure you don't search for just Ricardo. Word to the wise from Twitch chat. And in accepting the law of rent, which since the time of Ricardo has been accepted by every economist of standing, and which, like a geometrical axiom, has but to be understood to compel assent, the law of wages and law of interest and law of wages, as I have stated them, are inferentially accepted as its necessary sequences. In fact, it is only relatively that they can be called sequences, as in the recognition of the law of rent, they too must be recognized. For on what depends the recognition of the law of rent? Evidently upon the recognition of the fact that the effect of competition is to prevent the return to labor and capital being anywhere greater than upon the poorest land in use. No one thought that this poor land was going to be such a big deal. Everyone thinks it's crappy land and doesn't care about it, but actually, it isn't seeing this that we see that the owner of land will be able to claim as rent all of its produce which exceeds what would be yielded, to an equal application of labor and capital on the poorest land in use. The harmony and correlation of the laws of distribution as we have now apprehended them are in striking contrast with the want of harmony which characterizes these laws as presented by the current political economy. Let us state them side by side. If you're not watching, you're missing out on a nice little table that George makes for us. All right, on the left column, the heading is the current statement, and the right heading is the true statement. We will start with the current statement for rent. The current statement is rent depends on the margin of cultivation, rising as it falls and rising and falling as it rises. The true statement is the same. Rent depends on the margin of cultivation, rising as it falls and falling as it rises. All right, we're so far so good. The current statement for wages. Wages depend upon the ratio between the number of laborers and the amount of capital devoted to their employment. Wah, wah. The true statement is wages depend upon the margin of cultivation, falling as it falls and rising as it rises. Yay! Interest. The current statement is interest depends upon the equation between the supply of and demand for capital, or, as is stated of profits, upon wages or the cost of labor, rising as wages fall and falling as wages rise. Wah, wah. The true law of interest is that the interest, its ratio with wages being fixed by the net power of increase which attaches to capital. That's the reproductive forces of nature, basically. On net, averaged out, because some forms of capital do not benefit from the reproductive forces of nature. So interest depends on the margin of cultivation, falling as it falls and rising as it rises. And so since labor rises as it falls and falls as it rises on the margin of cultivation. That's rent, sorry. Wages are falling as it falls and rising as it rises. Interest falling as it falls and rising as it rises. That is a positive proportionality. So then George concludes, in the current statement of the laws of distribution, have no common center, no mutual relation. Yes, in the current statement of the laws of distribution, there's no common center or relation betwixt them. Yes. They are not the correlating divisions of a whole, but measures of different qualities. In the statement we have given, the true statement, they spring from one point, support and supplement each other, and form the correlating divisions of a complete whole. That's why he chose to write a book about them. And so we finish chapter 7, uh, the correlation or something he called it, or the correlation coordination of these laws. Now, chapter 8, the statics of the problem thus explained. We have now obtained a clear, simple, and consistent theory of the distribution of wealth, which accords with first principles and existing facts, and which, when understood, will commend itself as self-evident. Before working out this theory, I have deemed it necessary to show conclusively the insufficiency of current theories. For in thought as in action the majority of men do but follow their leaders, and a theory of wages which has not merely the support of the highest names, but is firmly rooted in common opinions and prejudices, will, until it has been proved untenable, prevent any other theory from being even considered, just as the theory that the earth was the center of the universe prevented any consideration of the theory that it revolves on its own axis and circles round the sun, until it was clearly shown that the apparent movements of the heavenly bodies could not be explained in accordance with the theory of the fixity of the earth. There is, in truth, a marked resemblance between the science of political economy, as at present taught, and the science of astronomy, as taught previous to the recognition of the Copernican theory. Yes, both sciences were off kilter. The devices by which the current political economy endeavors to explain the social phenomena that are now forcing themselves upon the attention of the world may well be compared to the elaborate system of circles and epicycles constructed by the learned to explain the celestial phenomena in a manner according with the dogmas of authority and the rude impressions and prejudice of the unlearned. And just as the observations which showed that this theory of cycles and epicycles could not explain all the phenomena of the heavens cleared the way for the consideration of the simpler theory that supplanted it, so will a recognition of the inadequacy of the current theories to account for social phenomena clear the way for the consideration of a theory that will give to political economy all the simplicity and harmony which the Copernican theory gave to the science of astronomy. Oh, if only it were so. We still have all of our economics uh, economists that are the analog of these learned men with their theories of cycles and epicycles, literally talking about, the boom and bust cycles, and I don't know about the epicycles comparison, but the Georgian view on the boom and bust cycles is just that people realize that they can just speculate on land instead of actually being productive, and more people do this until the you know straw breaks the camel's back, so to speak, and then you have a giant recession, and then people start doing the actual productive work again, and then people start realizing, oh, I don't need to do productive work, I can speculate off of their productive work, and anyway, lots of complicated economic theory has been written in the 150 years since George wrote, and it's all a bunch of crock. I mean, thing is, they just work, a lot of them just work with flawed premises, and then they apply really good, they may or may not apply better or worse reasoning from that point, but, if it starts off bad and you build off it, it's going to be skewed. Anyway, George continues. But at this point the parallel ceases. That the fixed and steadfast earth should be really whirling through space with inconceivable velocity is repugnant to the first apprehensions of men in every state and situation. But the truth I wish to make clear is naturally perceived, and has been recognized in the infancy of every people, being obscured only by the complexities of the civilized state. This again is kind of wish. I mean, he gives examples of how even in a complex state, these things hold. But if only we had him with us now, and he could explain to us why this still applies to our big tech industry and our airplane industry, these and our medical industry that's just so complex that these things people don't think they can be thought of simply. Um, Obscured only by the complexities, the warpings of selfish interest, and the false direction which the speculations of the learned have taken. To recognize it, we have but to come back to first principles and heed simple perceptions. Nothing can be clearer than the proposition that the failure of wages to increase with increasing productive power is due to the increase of rent. Nothing can be clearer than the proposition that the failure of wages to increase with increasing productive power is due to the increase of rent. All the socialists want to say it's capital. Three things unite to production: labor, capital, and land. Or just labor and land. Three parties divide the produce: the laborer, the capitalist, and the landowner. The laborer, the person who saved up labor, or the landowner. If, with an increase of production, the laborer gets no more and the capitalist no more, it is a necessary inference that the landowner reaps the whole gain. A bunch of these people that we call these like robber baron capitalist pigs or whatever, they had capital, yes, but they had land, or they had artificial like they had the railroads, right? um, they had artificial monopolies, or land monopoly. Oil barons, we think of them as capitalists, but they are landowners. And the facts agree with the inference, though neither wages nor interests anywhere increase as material progress goes on, yet the invariable accompaniment and mark of material progress is the increase of rent, the rise of land values. And it's like a little conflicting, right? Because building the railroads was good. Mining oil is good. You know, creating wealth is good. This is that the paradox of progress and poverty. Like, you know, the poverty arises with the progress, and then it also makes it sometimes hard to persuade people that the poverty um, can be got rid of, because everyone's just like, look at all of our progress. Anyway, the increase of rent explains why wages and interest do not increase. The cause which gives to the landholder is the cause which denies to the laborer and capitalist. That wages, yeah, everyone talks about moving the cost of living when you move to San Francisco offsets how much more you get paid as a employee at, you know, Meta or whatever. The cost of living in, that they're referring to is largely, and I would say fundamentally, all in the rent. Um, and if you ask that person, well, what are these costs of living? They would first of all say housing would be the number one thing. And just, yeah, we also tend to think of rent as being, um, we use the term rent a bunch, rent, rent, rent. But a bunch of people are effectively paying a kind of rent even though they are homeowners. They have mortgages and they are paying that to the banks and having to pay the interest on those loans. And then, of course, the banks are just getting a bunch of money printed by the government. Like the Fed loans all these banks money and then prints a bunch of money, and so those loans to those banks uh, become way cheaper to pay back because the Fed just printed a bunch of money. But that's getting into all these fancy manipulations of the modern economists, and people will argue with me, and yeah, that's harder to persuade you of. But anyway, back to Georgie boy. The increase of rent explains our wages and interest do not increase. The cause which gives to the landholder is the cause which denies to the laborer and capitalist. The wages and interest are higher in new than in old countries, is not, as the standard economists say, because nature makes a greater return to the application of labor and capital, but because land is cheaper, and therefore, as a smaller proportion of the return is taken by rent, labor and capital can keep for their share a larger proportion of what nature does return. It is not the total produce, but the net produce, after rent has been taken from it, that determines what can be divided as wages and interest. Hence, the rate of wages and interest is everywhere fixed, not so much by the productiveness of labor as by the value of land. Wherever the value of land is relatively low, wages and interest are relatively high. Wherever land is relatively high, wages and interest are relatively low. We need to make a shirt here that shows the algebraic formulation of this, and then it should have like the three proportionalities. One is inverse, and one is positive, or two are positive proportionalities, as in like wages and interest rise together, and land um, are rent inversely. Um, right, like back at our table here. Rent rises as the margin of cultivation falls, and falls as it rises. Yep. If I could go work on some land over there for free and make $100,000 a year, then this land right here is not going to be so valuable. Because if I have to work on this land right here and I can only make $110,000, but I can go down the street and make $100,000, why would I pay a lot of rent to live here? But as things currently are, if I had to go find free land, I'd have to go way outside of society and try to work that land. And honestly, I probably wouldn't survive. So I probably would be making close to $0 as as a worker on the marginal land. So I'm willing to pay a ton, most of what I am able to earn when I work somewhere here that is owned. Of course, um, I am above, my family is above George's wedge. We own land, and yeah. Okay, where were we? Hence, the rate of wages and interest everywhere now is by the value of land. Wherever the value of land is relatively low, wages and interest are relatively high. Wherever land is relatively high, wages and interest are relatively low. If production had not passed the simple stage in which all labor is directly applied to the land and all wages are paid in its produce, the fact that when the land owner takes a larger portion, the laborer must put up with a smaller portion, could not be lost sight of. But the complexities of production in the civilized state, in which so great a part is borne by exchange, and so much labor is bestowed upon materials after they have been separated from the land, though they may to the unthinking disguise, do not alter the fact that all production is still the union of the two factors, land and labor, and that rent, the share of the landholder, cannot be increased except at the expense of wages, the share of the laborer, and interest, the share of the capital. Just as the portion of the crop which in the simpler forms of industrial organization the owner of agricultural land receives at the end of the harvest as his rent, lessens the amount left to the cultivator as wages and interest, so does the rental of land on which a manufacturing or commercial city is built lessen the amount which can be divided as wages and interest between the laborer and the capital. They are engaged in the production and exchange of wealth. In short, the value of land, depending wholly upon the power which its ownership gives of appropriating wealth created by labor, the increase of land values is always at the expense of the value of labor, and hence that the increase of productive power does not increase wages is because it does increase the value of land. Rent swallows up the whole gain, and pauperism accompanies progress. He solved it. It is unnecessary to refer to facts. They will suggest themselves to the reader. It is the general fact, um, observable everywhere, that as the value of land increases, so does the contrast between wealth and want appear. I went to Culver City, this gentrified, fancy part of LA. It's gotten fancy, at least in the past 10 years. And yeah, there's all these nice little restaurants, dotted along its main strip, and people having nice dinners, sitting next to these like little, they each get their own little fireplace kind of thing, and then you walk past a homeless bum sleeping on the sidewalk. It is the universal fact that where the value of land is highest, civilization exhibits the greatest luxury, side by side with the most piteous destitution. To see human beings in the most abject, the most helpless, and hopeless condition, you must go, not to the unfenced prairies and the log cabins of new clearings in the backwoods, where man single-handed is commencing with the struggle with nature, the land is yet worth nothing, but to the great cities, where the ownership of a little patch of ground is a fortune. Yeah. And it's kind of, in George's age, the paupers weren't all on drugs. Um, and I guess it's sort of a separate question. Like, I don't know. Why is it that that so many of our poor people uh, get screwed up on drugs? It's not even clear exactly to me how, when I see sort of a crazy homeless person, how much that's drugs, or maybe that's just what mentally sort of happens to a person when they're isolated and desperate for 10 years. I don't know. Like, uh, isolation in jail terms is a kind of cruel punishment, right? And I know that when I'm going on the internet and seeing friends is sort of helpful. Uh, but if I couldn't interact with anybody on the internet at all, and I just sat at home for like a day or two straight, you start going a little crazy. I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, that concludes today's episode of the Henry George Daily Devotional. George has figured it all out. What more do you want? Book 4, Effective Material Progress upon this issue. The dynamics of the problem yet to seek. The effect of increase of population upon this. The effect of improvements in the arts. Some people have been asking me about this. Sort of, we talked about it yesterday. Um, like, what about when there are innovations? And the expectations raised by material progress. Interesting, interesting, interesting. See you later. Alligator. We have ended the recording. So, we did chapter 7, which is the correlation and coordination of these laws. George lists the laws of distribution, contrasts them with the old slash currently accepted and says coordination. True laws of distribution that stand that that come from the I'm calling the the law of incentive, which is my term for his man seeks to gratify his desires by least exertion of gravity idea. He contrasts the laws with the old currently accepted. Then I read book 3, The Laws of Distribution, chapter 8. Oh shit, that was chapter 8. No, yeah. The statics of the problem thus explained. What says that says that like the overcomplicated and clung to theories of astronomy prior to Copernican theory of sun centricity, so too all these overcomplicated theories of economy that are clung. Dispelling them means dispelling power. Yet, it, if only everyone were to consider the simple societies and realize we are no different. The poor, the impoverished arise next to the progressed. Hmm. YouTube. Oops, not that one. My drive. My guy. Chapter 7. George lists the laws of distribution and contrasts. George makes a table of the currently accepted laws versus the true laws. Law of rent is the same. Law of wages is fixed by George. Law of interest is fixed by George. The true laws all spring from the man seeks to gratify his desires by the path of least exertion. I'm calling this the law of incentives. Yeah. Chapter 8. The statics of the problem thus explained. Astronomers had overcomplicated theories before Copernican theory. This was replaced by a simpler theory. People clung to these theories desperately. So too, people they loved cycles and epicycles and were very learned of overcomplicated theories of political economy. They have many learned, detailed theories of this can all be replaced by a simpler theory. These true laws of distribution and incentive. Doing this will upset the powers that be. Anyone can but look to the simple societies and see these laws hold true clearly. Anyone can look at the highly progressed societies and see the greatest poverty. Upload. HEDD 48. Book 3, Chapter 7 and 8. Media, convert, save, add, 7 and 8. Done. Boom. Shaka. Shump. I should probably keep my summaries shorter, but oh well. I guess I didn't see any typos today. Welcome to May. Publico. I don't know why I should always just type this in instead. Podcasters on Spotify. Now, no, 148. No polls. Alright. What time is it? 9:28. I'll see you guys later.